Season 15 of My Hero Ultra Rumble is wrapping up, and a lot has changed. New characters have shaken up the meta, and some picks that looked dominant at the start of the season don't feel nearly as strong anymore. My name's Yestermorn, and in this video I'm putting together a full Season 15 tier list breaking down every character based on their current performance. We'll be looking at consistency, impact in real matches, and how well each character fits into the current meta. If you enjoy Ultra Rumble content, consider liking the video or subscribing, there's plenty more on the way. With that said, let's get into the tier list. First, let's talk about a character who's been hit hard by nerfs this season, Armored All Might. Back in Season 14, he was arguably one of the strongest characters we've ever seen. What made him so oppressive was his versatility. He genuinely had everything: insane damage, incredible mobility, strong control tools, and a massive 400 HP health pool. There really weren't any downsides to his kit, and that's exactly why he was so disliked when he was first released. Season 15 brought some much needed adjustments. His HP was reduced from 400 down to 350, which alone made him far less forgiving. On top of that, his burn damage was heavily nerfed, dropping from around 70 damage to roughly 10. These nerfs hit both his survivability and damage output. That said, Armored All Might is still a very solid character. His core kit hasn't changed, he can still do everything he did before, just not as well. Because of that, he lands comfortably in A tier for now. Now let's look at someone who actually got better this season, Ibara. Her Gamma now restores HP when she successfully grabs someone, which was a huge improvement and helped her sustainability a lot. That was always one of her biggest weaknesses, so this change made her noticeably more viable and more popular in matches. Outside of that though, she's largely the same character she's always been. She has solid damage, one of the strongest revives in the game, and can provide real value to a team. The problem, as you'll hear multiple times in this tier list, is mobility. Ibara has none, and in a fast-paced, movement-heavy meta, that automatically lowers a character's ceiling. She's definitely better than before, but she's still around average overall, so she lands in B tier. You all already know how I feel about Twice, that being I think he's the worst character in the game right now. He just doesn't do anything exceptionally well. For a rapid, his mobility is lacking, his damage is decent but it's nothing special, and his clones simply aren't threatening enough to shift a fight in his favor. There really isn't much else to say about him. He struggles to keep up in the pace of the current meta and doesn't bring enough value to justify picking over other options. I think a buff to his Gamma's movement would go a long way in making him more versatile, but as of right now he's just bad. He's the first character going into F tier. Next, let's look at Tech Shoto. I've mentioned this on other videos before, but in my opinion he is dead on average. He has some clear strengths, especially his excellent control and the survivability his Gamma provides, but he also comes with noticeable downsides. His abilities are very easy to dodge, and like several other characters on this list, he is cursed with having no mobility. That being said, in close quartered fights he's still one of the best at locking down space, but outside of buildings he struggles to keep up. He lands in C tier. A character I think is very similar to Tech Shoto in overall effectiveness is Tech Denki. He's a decent character, don't get me wrong, but he just doesn't truly excel at anything. His damage is respectable and his traps offer solid control, but none of it feels overwhelming or game-changing. Tech Denki really shines when he's playing alongside his team and maintaining proper spacing, because he struggles if he's on his own. I do think he's a solid pick for less skilled players because of his lock-on alpha, but in the bigger picture he's just average. I'll place him above Tech Shoto though, mainly because he at least has access to mobility. Strike Shigaraki is a character that's really fallen off recently. A while back his HP was nerfed from 350 down to 300 and he just hasn't felt the same since. Anytime I see an enemy Shigaraki, I immediately tense up thinking it's Tech Shiggy, but the moment I see Strike Shigaraki throw out one of his abilities, it's a big relief. He's so easy to deal with these days. His biggest flaw is still the same. He has absolutely no way to handle flying characters, and in a meta full of them, that's a massive weakness. He does still offer strong control and can be effective in certain situations, but overall he struggles too much to compete. He's D tier. Next, let's talk about my main, Rapid Mirio. Whether you love him or you hate him, I think most people would agree he's a pretty balanced character overall. He used to have the lowest HP in the game, but after the recent buff he's now at 250, which does help a bit, although not as much as I originally thought it would. It still means if you catch him out of position, he can get deleted pretty quickly. At the same time though, his kit gives him enough tools to avoid bad situations most of the time. His survivability is excellent and he almost always makes it to the endgame because of how hard he is to pin down. He does struggle a bit offensively though, especially when fighting multiple opponents at once. Top of V tier. Technical Nejire is a character that a lot of people complain about, but in reality she's not that strong. Sure, she can stay airborne for a long time, but that doesn't mean much when her movement speed is so slow. Being in the air without real speed just makes you an easy target for long-range alphas, and she gets shot down surprisingly fast. On top of that, she doesn't bring much utility to the team, she's mostly just raw damage. It's hard to justify picking her over other options, and in my opinion, she's in need of a buff or two. So for now, she's at the top of D tier. Another character I believe sits in D tier is Tech Dabi. Before his recent buff, I honestly would have placed him in F tier without hesitation, but he narrowly avoids that this time around. His alpha isn't completely useless anymore, which was always his biggest issue. Being able to consistently get chip damage actually goes a long way. Of course, he still suffers from having zero mobility, which is a massive drawback, but at least he's somewhat playable. I still think he's one of the weakest characters in the game overall, but he's definitely not as hopeless as he once was. Let's change pace and look at a really strong character, Lady Nagant. She's still in S tier, but she's definitely not the same character she was before. She got hit hard with some pretty heavy nerfs recently, and it's very noticeable. She's much weaker than she used to be and doesn't feel nearly as dominant in matches. That being said, her core design is still fundamentally overpowered. Her damage output is completely unmatched, and she can delete your GP and HP in an instant if you give her even a small opening. On top of that, she has incredible mobility, letting her reposition, take high ground, and stay safe while applying constant pressure. She still has everything you could possibly want in a character, and even with the nerfs, her only real weakness is her low HP. She's no longer as far ahead of the rest of the roster, but she's still firmly in S tier. Present Mike is a somewhat controversial character, mainly because of his insane damage output paired with relatively low popularity. I think he's underrated in some ways, but also overrated in others. I constantly see tier lists placing him in high A tier, which I just don't agree with. Yes, his damage is absurd, he can shred GP faster than almost anyone, but that's really all he brings to the table. His mobility is extremely limited, and that really limits him in this meta. When the late game safe zones get chaotic, he doesn't have the tools to reposition or escape bad situations. Being an offensive powerhouse isn't enough to make you top tier if you can't consistently survive, which is why I'm putting him in B tier. Let's cover the rest of the F tier characters now, starting with Asui Kirishima. He's the perfect example of power creep in this game. His kit just feels too basic compared to newer releases, and because of that he struggles to put out reliable damage. His attacks are very telegraphed and easy to dodge, especially against experienced players. He technically has two movement options, but neither of them are good enough to keep up. It's frustrating because he does have a couple things going for him. 400 HP is no joke, and his damage is actually solid when it connects. The problem is that landing those hits consistently is a real challenge. In my opinion, the final F tier character is Strike Dabi. He's another character that tends to be overrated just because of his raw damage output. In lower level lobbies he can absolutely dominate games, but at higher levels of play he falls apart quickly. His beta grab is really his only reliable source of big damage, but it leaves him locked in animation for several seconds. Against a coordinated team, that's a death sentence. They'll instantly collapse on him and punish him hard. He also has other glaring issues, but I've already gone in depth on Strike Dabi in other videos, so I won't drag this out. Just know he's not nearly as strong as people make him out to be, and that's why he ends up in F tier. A character that used to be in F tier is Mount Lady, and while her kit still feels pretty basic compared to the rest of the roster, she's gotten a lot better recently. She received some significant buffs that have really improved her overall performance. Her increase in HP has made it much harder to take her down, and her alpha can put out insane damage. On top of that, her special action can genuinely be strong in the right situations, especially in the late game scenarios where space is limited. The buffs have made her much more viable and a lot more consistent than she used to be. She's still a little below average overall, but this is a massive improvement from where she was before. When I talked about Rapid All Might in my Ranking Every Rapid video, a lot of people misunderstood what I meant and I got quite a bit of hate for it. I said his design is balanced, and some of you took that as me saying he isn't strong. Trust me, I know he's strong. What I meant was that his kit is well designed. His abilities flow together smoothly and he feels good to play. That doesn't mean he isn't powerful. Balance-wise, he's been really strong ever since his beta was changed. His grab has very forgiving tracking, and I honestly think that could use a small nerf or maybe even a slight damage reduction overall. He's absolutely a solid pick right now, which is why I'm placing him in A tier. A character I think is very comparable to Rapid All Might right now is Tsuyu Asui. She has some of the best mobility in the entire game, letting her chase down opponents or disengage whenever she wants. For a Rapid, her damage is also great, especially when she's able to weave in and out of fights. On top of that, she has one of the best revives in the game, which adds a ton of value to her team. A lot of people seem to underrate Froppy, but in the right hand she's incredibly hard to deal with. A good Tsuyu player feels almost impossible to catch and finish, which is why I'm putting her in A tier. I don't think there's a single truly bad support in the game, but in my opinion Overhaul is the weakest of the group. His kit is entirely carried by his Gamma, which is really his only consistent source of reliable damage. Outside of that, he struggles in a lot of areas. He has absolutely no mobility, and he has a terrible time fighting aerial opponents. His only real saving grace is his special action, which can essentially give him a second chance at life and adds much needed survivability. Overhaul can definitely be annoying to take down, but he's just too lackluster across the board. C tier. Rapid Hawks used to be the best character in the game, but he's obviously fallen off since then. He just doesn't have the same impact as he once did. That being said, I still think he's better than most people give him credit for. Yes, his damage is very low and he's not winning many fights on his own, but his mobility is still excellent and ability to mark enemies adds value in team play. I would never pick him in solos, but as a supportive Rapid, he can still contribute through chip damage. Even so, that utility isn't enough to push him higher than D tier. Assault All Might has gotten a lot better recently. His biggest problem is still how slow his kit feels. His Alpha and Beta both do solid damage, but they're sluggish and very easy to avoid. His Gamma is actually a strong ability and probably the best part of his kit, but it doesn't offer too much offensive pressure on its own. However, he received some big buffs that have made a huge difference, with his HP being increased to 350 and his Alpha getting a noticeable damage boost. Those changes have made him much more threatening and a lot harder to take down. Before this update, I definitely would have had him down in D tier, but these buffs have pushed him up quite a bit. He's still not the most fluid character to play because of how slow he feels, but he's no longer as easy to deal with as he once was, which is why he now lands in B tier. Tamaki Amajiki is still just a really solid character. I've said before that he's kind of the perfect example of what a strike character should feel like. Good damage, good pressure, and enough mobility to not feel helpless. He doesn't really have any glaring weaknesses, which is why he's always in a good place. He's been nerfed a bit, so he's not as crazy as he once was, and he can struggle when things get super chaotic, but overall he's just reliable. Tamaki is at the top of B tier. Strike Endeavor is probably my least played character in the game, so I'll admit I don't have a ton of personal experience with him. I think he's a decent pick that can put out some pretty solid damage. The main thing holding him back is his movement. It just feels outdated compared to what newer characters can do. He's been getting buff after buff though, and it's really starting to add up. He's slowly becoming a much stronger character than people give him credit for, and because of that I'm moving him up into the low B tier. Assault Deku is debatably the most basic character in the entire game, but that doesn't mean he's bad. Sometimes simple just works. If you can aim well, his Alpha can put up really strong damage. His Beta and Gamma together give him solid enough mobility to keep up in fights, and while Black Whip might be one of the weaker grabs in the game, it's still a grab, and grabs are always dangerous. He also recently received a buff that gives him a second Beta charge, which makes him significantly less expensive to build and improves his mobility in the early game. He doesn't really do anything flashy, but he doesn't need to. He's a reliable middle of the pack character, so he lands in B tier. Let's talk about Strike Shoto next. Even after a few nerfs, he's still really strong and honestly a bit underrated right now. He's one of the most versatile characters in the game right now and can pump out an insane amount of damage. All it takes is landing one Gamma and your entire GP is gone. On top of that, his movement is way better than people realize. He can keep up with a lot of the rapids if you use it well. He's just a super solid all-around character. Easy A tier. Momo is one of those characters the community can never seem to agree on. Some players think she's really strong, others think she's terrible. I'm kind of in the middle, I think she's just average. All of her abilities are really solid and give her options in a lot of different situations, and her special action has amazing value, giving out revive cards and team recovery drinks for free. That alone can swing games. The issue, like we've seen with a lot of characters already, is mobility. She just doesn't have any. And no, her beta does not count as movement, it's basically the same as her running speed. Because of that limitation, I'm putting her in C tier. Next up is Strike Denki. Everything about him is just okay with one major exception. He can put out an insane amount of damage in a very short amount of time, even more than Strike Shoto. All it takes is landing a stun, and then you can unload 3 or 4 alphas into the opponent before they can react. The burst damage is ridiculous, and it's often enough to delete Rapid Mirio in a single stun. On top of that, Strike Denki is probably the best character in the game at finishing down players. He's one of my personal favorites to play, and overall he lands in B tier. Shinso is someone I don't see nearly as often as I did a few months ago. I think players started realizing that he isn't as strong in every situation as people first thought, and he tends to struggle in late game scenarios. That being said, he's still a decent enough character overall. He has good damage, good mobility, and his special action can be really valuable toward the end of the match, getting you revive cards. The problem is that he doesn't handle multiple enemies very well, and once teams start collapsing in on him, his options become limited. Because of that inconsistency, I'm putting Shinso in high C tier for now. We're about halfway through the tier list now, so let's talk about the 3 new characters we got in Season 15, starting with Tokoyami. I agree with the general community opinion on this one. He's one of the most balanced characters we've seen released in a long time. He doesn't have overwhelming damage or crazy mobility like some of the recent additions, but he makes up for it with the utility he brings. His shield is incredibly useful for safely reviving teammates or getting items off in dangerous situations, and the ability to heal while airborne can be a lifesaver. He just provides a lot of small advantages that add up over the course of a match. It might be a bit of recency bias, but I think Tokoyami barely squeezes into A tier. Next up is support Nejire. She's probably the strongest character we got this season, but even she doesn't feel insanely overpowered. Obviously her healing and shield bring a ton of value to any team, but what really surprised me is her damage. For a support, she puts out way more consistent DPS than you'd expect. Honestly, why does support Nejire feel like she gets more reliable damage than tech Nejire? Ever since she released, I've been getting absolutely beamed by her alpha non-stop. She's definitely an A tier character and probably the best support in the game right now. The last character added in Season 15 is Assault Overhaul. He's definitely the weakest release we've seen in a while, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's bad. His main problem is just his damage, it's too low. That's really the biggest thing holding him back right now. Honestly, I think he's even worse than Support Overhaul. Yes, he has movement, which is nice, but the trade-off in damage just isn't worth it. He doesn't feel threatening enough in fights. I'm sure we'll see buffs for him at some point, but for now he lands in C tier. Assault Endeavor has taken a pretty big fall recently. He used to be one of the most feared characters in the game, but to be honest he's turned into one of the weaker ones now. I even ranked him as the second best Assault character just a few months ago. His biggest issue is still the same as it's always been. He has no combo potential whatsoever. He used to make up for that with raw damage, but now that his damage isn't as threatening, the rest of his kit just feels underwhelming. You barely see him played anymore, and when you do, he doesn't have the same impact as he used to. At this point, I honestly think he's worse than Strike Endeavor, so I'm putting him in D tier. Yet another character that has fallen off is Strike Kendo. Back in Season 14, she was honestly one of the best characters in the game, but now she just feels okay. She still has great combos, solid mobility, and there aren't any glaring weaknesses in her kit, but she just doesn't feel as powerful as she used to. I also just don't see her nearly as often anymore, which says a lot. At this point, she feels pretty comparable to someone like Shinso, still usable but not just standout strong. She lands in B tier. While we're at it, let's talk about Assault Kendo. I've said this before, but I really think she's just a victim of the current meta. Her damage is actually very good, and her shield gives her a strong defensive option that can completely shut down attacks. The problem is her mobility, or lack of it, and the fact she really struggles to deal with flying characters. In a meta where so many characters are constantly airborne, that's a huge disadvantage. I honestly think if the meta ever shifts away from heavy mobility, she would perform much better, but right now she barely avoids D tier and lands in C tier. Tech Shigaraki is another character that released in Season 14 and was immediately one of the strongest we'd ever seen. I actually caught a lot of flack back then because I said people were overrating how broken he was, and I honestly still stand by that. When you compared him to the other two monsters from that period, Armored All Might and Nagant, I always thought he was the weakest of the three. That doesn't mean he wasn't extremely strong though, because he absolutely was, and he definitely needed to be toned down. Now that his hitboxes and alpha charges have been adjusted, he feels much more balanced overall. He's still clearly powerful, but his attack power isn't nearly as overwhelming as before. However, with other top tier characters getting nerfed and the overall tier list shifting, he's risen back up by comparison. Because of that, I now think he belongs in S tier. I want to cover the two Ochacos now, starting with Rapid Ochaco. She's definitely still a very strong character even after the nerfs, and in the right hands she can be one of the best in the game. I think people underrate her a lot, and from a kit design perspective, she's kind of broken. Her abilities flow together extremely well, and it feels like you never get a moment to breathe when fighting her. A good Rapid Ochaco is constantly pressuring you, chaining abilities together, and just staying out of reach. She's easily one of my least favorite heroes to fight in the entire game, and because of that, I'm putting her toward the top of A tier. Now let's talk about Assault Ochaco. She's also really strong, but in my opinion still a step below Rapid Ochaco. If you've ever fought against her, you already know why she's so good. She has great damage, great mobility, and great survivability. There really isn't much she can't do, and on top of that, she's fairly easy to pick up compared to a lot of other stronger characters. There honestly isn't a ton to say about her, she's just a very solid all-around pick, also A tier. Recently I've come to realize that Strike Deku isn't as good as I once thought he was. His biggest problem is his poor mobility, and he doesn't have much else to make up for that. Like Assault Deku, he can deal great damage if you're able to land your shots, and really the damage ceiling is even higher. The issue is that damage is pretty much the only thing he brings to the table. He especially struggles in late game situations where movement becomes extremely important, and you almost never see Strike Deku alive at the end of the match. Even so, his raw damage keeps him from being bad, so I'm putting him up in the high C tier. Mr. Compress really hasn't been the same since his damage nerfs. That was always the biggest thing he had going for him, and without it, he just doesn't feel nearly as threatening. That said, he's still a decent enough character overall. His kit can be really annoying to deal with, especially when he's raining down alphas from above the entire match. He still has some solid utility and can create some chaotic situations and fights, but his overall impact just isn't what it used to be. He's not bad by any means, but he's also not great either. Because of that, I'm putting him at the top of C tier. Next is Tech Mirio. He's a very strong character right now, and honestly one of the best in the game. He doesn't necessarily do any one thing extraordinarily well, but he's extremely well rounded across the board. His counter hits like a truck and gives him a ton of value in fights, especially against aggressive players. He is a bit easier to hit than Rapid Mirio, but he makes up for that with more damage and HP. On top of that, his alpha is really strong and probably needs a nerf. Overall, he's just a really solid and reliable character in the current meta, which is why I'm placing him in A tier. Rapid Bakugo is a character that takes some skill to play, but can be very strong in the right hands. His mobility makes him hard to catch, and he can weave in attacks between his movement to put out some pretty solid damage. Like most Rapids though, his biggest downside is survivability. If he gets caught out without any abilities, he doesn't have the HP to sustain himself for very long. Still, in the hands of a good player, he can be a real problem, so overall, he's a solid character and lands in B tier. Now we might as well talk about Strike Bakugo, and I think he's a little better than his Rapid counterpart right now. There really isn't anything bad about Strike Bakugo, he just does everything well. He has good damage, solid mobility, and 350 HP, which gives him better survivability than most characters in his role. He's one of those picks you can always rely on to get consistent results. Because of that, I'm putting him at the top of B tier. Next is Kurogiri. I do feel like he's a bit overrated, but he's by no means bad. He has by far the best overall range in the entire game, and in most fights against him you'll barely even see him. He's a great support character who can assist his team from afar and even warp them out if they get into trouble. On top of that, he actually does some pretty solid damage as well. His biggest shortcoming is the late game. As the safe zone gets smaller, his playstyle becomes a lot harder to execute, and he's often taken out pretty easily. Even with that, he's still a solid pick, so in my opinion, he deserves B tier. Technical Toga is a character I enjoy playing a lot, and one I think is currently underrated. I really don't understand why she isn't played more. Her alpha is incredibly annoying and can put out a ton of damage. Her beta is one of the best horizontal movement options in the game, and her gamma has tracking. On top of that, she can transform into other characters whenever the situation calls for it, which gives her a ton of versatility. This might be one of my more controversial takes in this video, but I'm putting her into A tier. She's a very strong character right now. Let's cover Aizawa next. If you asked me a few seasons ago, I would have told you he was one of the best characters in the game. Now, I don't think he's nearly as strong, but it's not because he's been nerfed or anything, it's more that newer characters have been added that kind of leave him behind. His simpler kit just struggles to compete with the huge damage abilities and insane mobility we're seeing in the current meta. That being said, he's still not a bad character at all, and we all know how strong Aizawa can be in the right hands. He lands in A tier. Players can never seem to agree on where to rank Iida, and I kinda feel the same way. He's gotten a lot of buffs recently, and they've definitely made him much better, but I still don't think he's top tier or anything. I think he'll always struggle more than he should because he's a rapid with no ranged options, meaning he has to get in close with very low HP. That just makes it really hard to survive, especially in the late game. He can definitely be a menace earlier on though, and puts out great damage, so I'm still putting him into B tier. I think it's about time we talk about who I believe is the best character in the game right now, and that's One For All Deku. There was a stretch where I kind of forgot about him because of all the Season 14 characters, but now that they've been nerfed, One For All Deku is right back in the spotlight. This character is just overtuned. He has pretty much everything you could ever want. Great damage, great mobility, and a ton of different abilities. He also debatably has the best alpha in the game, with a huge hitbox that knocks you down instantly. A lot of people say Nagant and Tech Shigi are still better, but I honestly disagree. I'm putting him into S tier. Monoma's a weird character to rank because his effectiveness really depends on how strong the rest of the roster is. When there are a lot of overpowered characters running around that he can copy abilities from, Monoma becomes really strong. But in a more balanced meta, he naturally drops off a bit. I'd say the game is actually pretty balanced right now compared to the last few seasons, so he's a little lower than I would normally place him. That being said, the buff to his HP made him much more reliable, and he's still a very solid pick overall. He's definitely A tier. Someone I see a lot less of these days is Rapid Toga. Just a few seasons ago she was considered overpowered by most players, but now she's hardly played. I'm not sure exactly why, but I think it mostly comes down to there being better options added over time. She still has great mobility and good damage for a Rapid, but she's a bit harder to play and honestly feels a little lackluster compared to the rest of the roster. Like Iida, she struggles a lot with survivability in the endgame, which really hurts her consistency. It feels a little wrong to put her this low, but for now I'm placing her in C tier. One of the characters I hate fighting against the most is Strike Hawks. I've said it before and I'll say it again, this character takes no skill to play effectively. As a Mirio player, there's almost nothing I can do to avoid getting caught in his beta, and once that happens, he's going to follow it up with other moves and take all of your GP. With my personal bias aside though, Strike Hawks is a very good character and one that I think is a little underrated. Anytime a character has this much damage and movement, they're going to be strong. He's A tier. Only 5 left to go, so let's start with Young All For One. At launch, everyone thought this character was overpowered, but I never really saw it. I thought he was strong, but I never had too much trouble dealing with him. Now it seems like the community has started to realize that he isn't that great. He has solid damage and everything, but he's just a slow character with very predictable attacks. Sometimes his AoE feels almost unavoidable, and that's probably the biggest thing he's got going for him. As the match goes on, he gets stronger, but overall he's just not as threatening as people once thought. I'll put him in B tier. Cementoss is next, and before support Nejire was added, he was the best support character in the game. There really isn't any other character like him. His structures give him some of the best vertical movement in the game, and they make him one of the hardest characters to take out because of how well he can stall and reposition. On top of that, he has a really strong revive that adds a ton of value to a team. He is a bit slow and clunky, and his range damage isn't the highest, but he excels so much in other areas that it barely matters. He's definitely an A tier. I really like Assault Shigaraki, and I do think he's underrated, but in the grand scheme of things, he's still just okay. He has great area control, but doesn't deal much damage and struggles a lot against flying characters. For having 2 ranged options, neither of them are very fast or have much range, which really holds him back. His Gamma is definitely the star of his kit though, offering good mobility and high damage when used correctly. You can make Assault Shigi work if you really want to, but there are other characters that you'll generally get more value out of. He's not bad by any means, but he lands at the top of C tier. Strike Kirishima has somehow managed to avoid any nerfs, and he's just as strong as ever. At this point, everyone knows this character is overtuned. He really just has everything, good mobility, great damage, and a shield on top of it all. He's one of those characters that can take over a fight almost instantly if you're not careful. That being said, I do feel like a lot of players who use him aren't that great, so I usually end up beating him anyway. Still, purely based on his kit, he's easily A tier, and King needs to nerf him already. Last but not least is All For One, another character that I believe is pretty underrated. All 3 of his abilities are really strong, and a good All For One player will take advantage of them all. He isn't that great at the very beginning of a match, mainly because of his lack of mobility, but as the match goes on he can steal quirks and become much more versatile. You also tend to see a lot of skilled players using him, probably because he's not only a strong character, but also one that really lets you show off your skill. Overall, he's a solid pick and lands an A tier. That about does it for this tier list video. Of course, this is just my personal opinion. I tried to make the tier list as balanced as possible, but it did end up being a little top heavy. Still, I think this list does a pretty good job of showing the overall effectiveness of each battle style right now. I'm always curious to hear what you think though, so which placements do you disagree with? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, consider liking it or subscribing for more Ultra Rumble content just like this. Season 16 is almost here and I've got a lot of great content planned. Thanks for watching, this has been Yestermorn and I'll see you in the next one.